Well, hello again, everybody. This is John Norris at Trading Perspectives. As always, we have our good friends Courtney Truss and Sam Clement. You all say hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Listen, I'm doing great, Sam. However, I would be doing much, much better if filling up my tank at the Shell station, the BP, the Exxon, if it weren't so gosh darned expensive. Your thoughts on that?
It's eye-watering right now. I mean, it's just the highest I can remember, at least in the last several years.
Oh, for sure.
And so the thing is, guys, I mean, obviously, if you're hearing the sound of my voice and you live in the United States, that you know that gasoline prices have gone up through the roof, the highest levels in recent memory, and a lot of blame is being put on what's going on in Eastern Europe. However, we have seen crude oil prices creep up in the 12 months prior to this. It's just really come to kind of what I'd call it a head, and with the turmoil in Ukraine, as crude oil prices got up, $120, $130 a barrel, depending on whether or not you're looking at Brent or WTI or which exchange. And that's just, I mean, honestly, that's going to pinch. That's going to hurt the average American consumer, because obviously if it's costing producers 130 or refineries or retailers that much money, they're going to have to pass that on along. And gasoline, for all intents and purposes, is what an economics professor, Courtney, would call relatively inelastic. And so, fortunately enough here, Birmingham's not like a major huge place where you got to drive forever to get there, and most of us live somewhat near the office, but God feel for some of those people that have long commutes, and here we are staring $4 gasoline in the face, and some places even higher than that, $5-6.
Well, we've talked about it before. In gas prices, the tentacles they're in everything. I mean, goods have to be transported. Okay, well, you need either a plane, train, or automobile, just about, and you need gasoline for that. And so, crude prices, yes, going up, and gasoline too. It impacts everything, and it's a lot further reaching than just getting to work every day.
And I think it's starting to affect people's behavior. At a certain time, people are going to say, okay, either I buy gas or I go out to eat. Or is it even, hey, I'm not going to go do that this weekend, or I'm not going to drive to the beach, or I'm not going to, and maybe at this point to y'all it's still, okay, you're still going to do those things. But I'll tell you, I feel like I never watched my gas tank as much as I do now. And I'm like, oh my gosh, yet again, it's empty. It just feels like it's constantly empty, and I'm filling it up, and it's $60, $70. And that starts, really adding up each month on top of every other expense. And, you look at the grocery stores, not much better. I mean, everyone's kind of, are you going to buy the premium brand, or are you getting the generic? And, those little bits are kind of starting to add up towards the checkout line.
Well, you bring up an interesting point. I would tell you, Courtney, where you're a little bit different than, say, Sam or I are. You're carting kids around hither and yon. I mean, you're picking kids up from daycare, from school, going to the ballpark, where $5 doesn't buy anything. I think that's what you said. Let's where's a dollar doesn't buy you anything. Yeah. Going to the ballpark, practices, games, all that stuff. So you're doing a lot more driving than I am. I drive 5 miles to work and 5 miles home from work, and maybe I'll drive over to the Fresh Market across the street. Sam's even closer to the office than that.
Yeah, I mean, 5 miles is about my daily total miles driven. I mean,
so I think that really what you were talking about really does depend on the consumer. And plus, I drive a car that gets about 36 miles to the gallon on the highway. I didn't do that intentionally. It just happened to be one of those benefits. But I would say, Courtney, what will probably happen is if gasoline prices remain this elevated and incomes don't come up, I would say probably not postponing the trip to the beach. You're probably not going to not go on vacation. But what you might do is, like you said, maybe not get the premium brand, or you might go rent the movie on Netflix or Amazon Prime as opposed to going to the theater, or something along those lines. Or maybe you don't go to Gianmarco's and you go to Applebee's, your favorite restaurant, instead. I think.
I mean, but you are kind of starting to see impacts in the economic data from this too. I mean, obviously,
we saw retail sales.
Yeah, retail sales coming in pretty weak, and then inflation continuing to run hot, and people are getting less for the same amount of money, and overall spending less money too. So it's kind of a double whammy.
So I mean, for Courtney, going back to your question, it means maybe that when you all go out to dinner, that you don't get the blooming onion like your family likes to get. When y'all go to the restaurant, and instead you just get the entree as opposed to the blooming onion, that sort of thing. So I don't think that's necessarily going to crush the U.S. economy in and of itself, but obviously it'll change consumer expenditures.
Well, I guess like my question is like, is this just where you have to put your head down and just like get through it, and there's a light at the end of the tunnel? Like we're just, once we're out of the Ukraine conflict, like it won't be this ridiculous. I mean, I remember a time when I was in college and gas prices were ridiculously high, and I remember, like, I just stopped. I was like, okay, is it even worth having this babysitting job? Because the gas to get there is not even covered by how much I'm making. And so I wonder is there light at the end of the tunnel? Or is it a matter of people are going to say, I need to make more money. I need to do, or, you know, well, where does it, where's the give and take?
I think it's kind of both. I think you do see this show up in consumer sentiment and people being just generally unhappy right now. And gas prices, again, impact everybody. It's impossible to not be impacted by gas prices, even if you have an electric car. And so it's a huge part of consumer sentiment. But I do think that high gas prices start to, in the longer run, can be deflationary because people start to actually go out and purchase less and less. And it's kind of a cycle. So the higher they go, the less people spend, and that can kind of work itself.
I mean, energy is not immune from the laws of supply and demand.
Right.
So the light at the end of the tunnel is when the growth in supply meets or exceeds the growth in demand, and then that will drive down prices. I mean, it's just as sure as the nose on my face. What we've seen really since the end of 2020 is U.S. production just hadn't kept up with the demand for it. I mean, part of that is coming out of the worst of the COVID pandemic. I mean, all of a sudden people were traveling again and whatnot, so we were demanding a lot more. But according to the EIA.gov website that I've been to, we're also producing less crude oil than we were in 2019 prior to the pandemic, and a pretty significant amount. It's like 9 to 10%, about 10% less than what we were back in 2019, which is almost a month's supply.
But isn't that intentional? Because didn't they say, like, the industry as a whole, we're not going to try to meet demand, like we're going to set like what we're going to create? I feel like you're right.
Yeah, I just think you have to look back at where some of these U.S. producers were and how bloated their balance sheets, and a lot of these companies were just in an awful spot. And now before these prices got up to $130 a barrel, we're talking about restructuring and how they were going to change their overall business and start returning capital to shareholders instead of just putting more money into new leases and more money into the ground that got them into those bad situations. And so now you're seeing companies kind of sticking to their guns for what they said they were going to do. And these higher prices, that money's not going back into the ground, it's going back towards the shareholders. And so far, they've pretty much stuck to their guns with that. And so I think that's a key difference is they were in a bad spot. And so they've kind of, most of them been able to work themselves out of that bad spot, and they don't necessarily want to get back into it.
Yeah, so I mean, and kind of adding on to what Sam said, I mean, you know, exploring and producing a lease or what have you costs a ton of money. I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars potentially, depending on how many you've got and all that stuff. So I mean, it's not something, I've got this lease, I'm going to go drill it, you know, because hey, crude oil went up to 130 because the Russians invaded Ukraine. No, that's not really the way the world works. I mean, it takes the energy companies a long time to get in there, develop, and start producing stuff. And I mean, I think Saki's out there saying there's 9,000 unused leases. How many of them are dry? How many of them are producing? So there's a lot into that. There's a lot that goes into the price of crude oil, and why we can't just turn production on a dime. So, but longer term, we need to, as a country, decide whether or not we want to be energy independent. That includes fossil fuels and all that stuff. If we want to be energy independent, or whether or not we want to depend on people like Vladimir Putin and Nicolas Maduro and the Saudis for our energy needs, because the last I checked, we still use internal combustion engines, and those require some kind of fuel in order to, charge the pistons and all that stuff, get those firing. And you can't fill up your tank, Courtney, with wishful thinking.
I wish I could.
And it seems like everyone's come to a consensus that the runway for these energy companies has probably gotten shorter for the amount of time they're going to be, a going concern. Whether that's 30, 40, 50 years, that time has probably come down, or at least a consensus. So it's hard to blame these companies for wanting to return capital to shareholders sooner rather than later. If you're a company who, may not be here in 80, 100 years, possible cash flows down that far down the road don't really matter as much anymore, and your whole timeline for a valid company has been shortened. And
yeah, I mean, to that end, I mean, sort of the threat of a green revolution, clean energy, renewables, all that stuff. If you're dredging up dead dinosaurs out of the ground, you're probably thinking, okay, my lifespan here is about as long as a dinosaur. Catch my drift, Sam?
Yeah.
So they're probably thinking, yeah, you're right. I mean, we're not talking about cash flows 30 years from now. We got to get while the getting's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, but don't you also think that that's kind of pushing people to explore other options by the fact that prices are so high right now, that it's going to push people to want to have the electric cars and look at alternatives, which is then going to drive down demand? I mean, I know we're a ways away from that.
Well, we are a ways away from that, and actually the U.S. consumes far less energy per capita than we used to, and even far less crude oil. So I think that definitely is the future, but to anticipate every American's going to go out and trade in their car for an electric vehicle over the next 12 months or even over the next 60 months is kind of wishful thinking.
Right.
And, car prices where they are now are very expensive, and the average American household just can't go out and go get a Tesla or go out and get some fully electric cars because, one, the infrastructure is not there yet. The charging stations aren't quite there yet. And, oh, by the way, American households might not just have an additional $40,000 sitting around that they're going to go purchase a new car.
It seems like most people are relatively in agreement. It's just the disagreement comes to what the timeline is for these things.
Yeah.
People talking about we're going to be completely electric by 2030. Okay, well,
that's
clearly
California said
that's clearly not going to happen.
Right.
I mean, that is insane to say that we're going to be completely off fossil fuels by 2030. And then you have other people saying it's probably going to be, 2300 before that happens. And the reality of it, like most things, is probably somewhere in the middle. And that's where the problems are, is people, and we've seen it in Europe, becoming more dependent on Russia, is trying to so quickly get onto green energy when that's just not realistic. And that's the same issues that they are seeing now, being more dependent on Russia. And it's the same issues we would see if we become more, we try and get green energy here by 2030. It's just going to cause more issues.
So looking at the conflict now, do y'all feel like do you think that we could potentially exit the conflict in the next 30 days? And if we do you think that will drastically drive down prices? Or do you think that that's a little bit of a cover for the prices being what they are? Do you see them drastically decreasing? Because everyone's saying, oh, it's just the conflict, but we know it's not just the conflict.
Well,
there's also inflation.
I think it's worth noting that they've already come down significantly.
Yeah,
I mean, we've quoted 130, 135, and they were that price, but now they're back in the 95-ish range.
96 for West Texas Intermediate.
That's a pretty significant drop. I mean, oil has had some of the best weeks and some of the worst weeks in recent history in the last couple weeks, so they are starting to come down.
You certainly do still have some speculation out there. However, when the Indians said that they'd be willing to buy discounted Russian gas, that's really what caused the balloon to kind of burst a little bit and on the short-term speculation. Russia can get its 5 million barrels out through the back door, either through the south to India or to the east to China, and get it on out there in terms of global supply. There still is a little bit out there. I mean, whenever there's uncertainty, people throw money into hard assets and what have you. So if we can get this taken care of, in 30 days or 60 days or what have you, we'll see prices come back down a little bit. It's just a little bit easier to get that supply out there, and we're not running around trying to figure stuff out. However, I would say that if the administration were to change tack and say, hey, we're going to go drilling again in Anwar, and let's go with all the pipelines we can, that would remove any sort of shorts or what have you on energy futures, and we'd see crude oil prices go down.
So how much do y'all think it'll go down? I need to plan my...
Well, the problem is prices go up. What do they say? Up an elevator and you take the stairs down.
Yeah.
They're clearly going to raise their prices a lot quicker as their input costs go up and probably drag their feet. But that's how business is, and that's how pretty much any business is. If your input costs are variable like that, you're going to drag your feet on dropping your own prices.
I would say, Courtney, and this is just looking into the crystal ball, the magic 8 ball, the tea leaves, all that stuff. I would say sort of the worst of the freak out or the panic regarding crude oil prices, getting again to what Sam said and I said earlier, the $130 a barrel. I think that worst case scenario is probably over, and we go from the 95, 96 down down to, maybe a more standardized or market clearing price of $75, $80 a barrel. I don't know exactly what that number is after we put this turmoil in Eastern Europe behind us. Even so, that's when you're driving to the ballpark, when you're driving to schools and all that stuff, you'll be paying more at the pump this year than you did last year, unfortunately. Just sorry to say that to you. So no more Gianmarco's, hello Applebee's or Outback Steakhouse, but you can't get
Awesome Blossom.
But you can't get the bloomin' onion like you and your family like so much.
Yeah, I think we can do to maybe not hit the 1,000 calories for that.
I think it's like 2,000.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and so it means that maybe you do get the good value creamer that you like so much.
Well, some things we're just not willing to sacrifice.
Or maybe the sausage that your family likes so much. Maybe you can compromise on that. What were some of the things that you'd be willing to compromise on, Sam?
That's a good question. I don't really know. Kind of like how my life is. I'd rather not compromise.
Well, I mean, you don't always have that choice. I do think a lot of people moved out or like moved away from central, maybe Birmingham. I know we've had coworkers that were able to move away, and then you think about, okay, well, when they did need to come into the office, it might have been a 45-minute commute, but they live in heaven, right? That was their dream location to live. And
using that as an analogy or an euphemism, but not
the
actually,
ones who have gone on to
no.
Valhalla.
But they're dead now.
Yeah, no, that went dark. You went real dark. Anyways, I wonder if it'll make people look at potentially, maybe not moving back, but looking at, through COVID, we did have people remote, and it's like, okay, will that trigger some people if they can't sell their house immediately and move somewhere, because obviously it's expensive to move. The housing market's still expensive, and so what does that look like for them? And I wonder if companies will make adjustments to allow for that.
That's a good question.
Let's look at our leadership and see what they would say.
I would say probably so in the short term.
Yeah.
And you'll probably have certain people say that they would like to move remote, and then when gasoline prices come down, they would like to come back into the office, and that's going to cause maybe some HR headaches. But ultimately, with the ability to work remotely, if gasoline prices persist, you'll probably see a few more people that are on the fence about it, saying, "Okay, well, I'll go fully remote." But it should not be that huge sea change where all of a sudden 20% of people who work in the office are saying, I'm now working remote.
No,
probably
but there is cases where it's hard to blame someone if a huge part of your cost, if you have a large commute going up 33% in a couple weeks. I mean, if that's a large part of your budget getting to and from work and then spiking that 33% in a couple weeks again, that hurts.
Yeah.
What I hear y'all saying is that you don't think in 30 days this is going to be as bad of a situation. So, I mean, to that point, you probably wouldn't have something. But if you're sitting here looking at a full quarter or potentially 6 months out of the year, someone might say, hey, I can't continue to absorb this cost.
It's going to be a real interesting thing, because your employer or an employer would very rightly say, that's not my problem.
Right.
That's your problem. Your job is in the office, and you need to get here. So I don't think employers are all of a sudden going to find, oh my gosh, Sam, I'm so sorry, your commute's gotten so expensive. You chose to live 45 minutes away from the office. You chose to drive the F-15,000, that sort of thing. These are decisions that you've made. That's not necessarily the employer's problem.
But the tight labor market probably throws a little bit of a wrench in that. If you have
and
to
the fact that people were able to work remotely during COVID.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, if your job allowed you to work remotely, would they be more flexible? And to your point, too, like, it might just be like, okay, well, and, you're sitting here saying labor market, well, there's plenty of jobs that you can get remotely right now. So, all right, then if y'all can't make accommodations, then I'll just go somewhere else.
You'll probably see some measure of the workforce go out and do that, and you'll see certain employers do it. But I would venture to say that I doubt a ton of employers are going to say, okay, now everyone go work remotely, and gasoline prices come down. Everyone come back into the office, because there's space planning you have to do. There's capacity issues. So I think that's really kind of more of a one-off basis as opposed to a sea change or something
I agree.
like that.
Yeah.
I agree.
So Anything, we talked about anything that you're thinking about giving up. With higher gas prices, Courtney, it's impacting you far more than it's impacting me.
I'd say road trips are something I'd probably give up, because that's something we've done a decent bit of. The 4-hour away kind of trips.
Yeah.
There's less incentive to do those and not just fly.
Well, Beth and I will probably take the same car as opposed to separate cars when we go to our cabin in the woods.
Fair enough.
How about you?
Yeah, I think the same, and probably for us also looking at if it's 30 days, okay, well maybe we don't go to the nicer restaurant. Maybe we do go to Applebee's for date night. Yes. Just like making small things to kind of make up the difference.
Date night?
Where do you take Beth on date night? No one can see the face that I'm giving you. I'm staring daggers at John.
Date
Not
night.
Applebee's, is that your answer?
When you get to be my age, what's a date night?
Is it every night, John? I'm just so lucky to be with
every
Beth.
night. Every night's a date night. I don't even know where an Applebee's is.
I've never been to
There used to be one right across the way.
That's not to knock on Applebee's, and I know I've been teasing Courtney the whole podcast about Applebee's, which she's probably never been into one in her life.
Maybe in high school. It's been a while.
No, it's been a while. So I hear what you're saying. Anything else on this before we start wrapping it up?
I think that's it.
Yeah.
All right, guys, thank y'all so much for listening. We always love to hear from you. Also, if you have any questions or comments, please, by all means, let us know. You can always reach us by sending us an email at tradingperspectives@oakworth.com, or you can leave us a review on the podcast outlet of your choice. As always, if you're interested in reading more or hearing more of what we have to say or how we think, please go to oakworth.com and take a look underneath the Thought Leadership tab for all kinds of exciting information. With that, again, one last time on this topic.
That's all I got.
That's it, John.
That's all I've got today, too. Y'all take care.